The court's decision this morning on Heathrow is utter madness. It flies in the face of all of the data and all of the targets that the UK government has been set around carbon emissions. I think it will be regarded as the worst decision that the Department for Transport has ever made. I think it's the perfect example of how our politics favours current generations at the expense of future generations. I think that inevitably the Heathrow third runway will be cancelled. The public outcry as the climate change concerns rise and rise will mean that will happen. And as it is done, billions of pounds of taxpayers' money will be wasted. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Scottish government, the Welsh government declare essentially national emergency around the climate change. Ed Miliband on Radio 4 Today programme yesterday morning described us as really needing to be on a war footing. And I think that really demonstrates the scale at which we need to be taking this issue forwards. We are going to miss, the Climate Change Committee has already told us we are going to miss our targets for carbon dioxide and for climate change. And they are the statutory body responsible for monitoring and informing government about their progress. I think it's highly likely that in the next week or 2 weeks, they will review where we're at and make the targets even tougher and ask us to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees rather than the current target of 2 degrees. So the targets are going to get tougher and tougher. Let's look at Heathrow. Heathrow is the single biggest source of carbon emissions in the UK. Department for Transport want to double the number of flights in the next, between now and 2050. There's a total disconnect there between our targets, our climate targets, the concerns around climate change, and what we're doing with aviation and with Heathrow. Very, very evident. Furthermore, the decision is just bad economics. The Stern report told us that our GDP, our gross domestic product, will decline between 5% and 25% as a result of climate change. It's going to be devastating for our economy. Aviation is already very heavily subsidised as an industry because aviation fuel is not subject to tax or duty. That subsidy, after you allow for air passenger duty, is about £6.6 billion a year, which is £240 per household, whether you fly or whether you don't. So here we are giving another big financial boost to an industry which is very polluting, growing its pollution levels, and already unfairly cheap because of a very heavy tax subsidy. That makes no sense to me. What we really should be doing is using some of this money to invest in the future. In the future, we want to be world leaders in electric aviation. That's where our money should be going instead of expanding Heathrow. And finally, there's a major social justice issue here. 95% of the world's population will never fly. In the UK, close to half of the population don't take a flight. It's just 15% of the UK population that takes 70% of the flights. And yet, whether we fly or whether we don't, or whether we will never fly in developing countries, all of us, our children and our grandchildren, are going to suffer the consequences of global warming. The insanity reaches new heights when you look at the new Economic Foundation's research into the Heathrow expansion. What they show is that by 2040, 75% of the passengers using Heathrow won't be British. They will in fact be international travellers and transfers as people move through the UK and use it as a transport hub. So in summary, at Responsible Travel, we vehemently oppose the third runway. We'll be one of the first to join the protest, which will inevitably escalate around that decision. And what we think should happen is that we should be managing down the number of flights, and we should be investing in a future, managing a transition to a future where we're the world leaders in electric aviation. That's the plan that we support, and something which we think could be funded further through something called a green flying duty, which should be ring-fenced for electric and decarbonised air travel. You can read more on that in our manifesto for the future of tourism.